Sorry, technical delays. It is 6:07. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'm looking for a motion to establish the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The agenda is established. And I will hand it over to Superintendent Koloski for recognition.
Good evening. I see a whole lot of smiling, happy faces and awesome shirts because tonight is our recognition of our destination imagination. Even the title itself is fun to say. It is a long-standing tradition on Mercer Island to have our students participate in this nonprofit educational program that is dedicated to teaching our students the creative process through hands-on science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, otherwise known as STEAM. They also have service learning challenges built into their teamwork as student teams, and they get to solve a variety of open-ended challenges and problems that they present at tournaments. And I know when they come up to introduce themselves, they're going to be jingling and jangling with all of those medals and awards around their neck. This year, Mercer Island qualified a record 14 elementary, middle, and high school teams to the state competition in Kennewick. And 6 teams have now qualified for the global finals to be held May 22nd to the 25th in beautiful Kansas City. They will join 1,400 teams encompassing 17,000 students from 15 countries. West Mercer Elementary Mark Headley manages the Mercer Island Destination Imagination Program, now in its 12th year. And Mr. Headley recently honored 7 seniors for their years of participation in DI with trophies, including Andrew Motes, who has been in the program for 9 years. So you younger students in the front, you have something to aspire to. Tonight, Mr. Headley is here with many of the students who competed at the state tournament this past weekend. And we want to meet these teams and hear a little bit about each of their team projects. So what we're going to ask you to do is come up as teams, and Mr. Headley, if you wouldn't mind joining them at the microphone to have them introduce their project and their team.
Very much. I want to first thank the board and all of the Mercer Island School District and staff and administrators for their continued support of the program. The students have a lot of fun showing their creativity and solving their problems, and they would like to thank you for your support. I would also like to mention that we not only have a record year of the 14 teams going to state, but we have a record year of team managers. We have Mr. Griffin Jones from Island Park. We have Ashley Selden, who please come up. She's here tonight from Lake Ridge. We have a parent who's been helping us team manage, Peter Selden. And another parent who helps us, Alice Finch. I believe Peter's a Northwood parent?
Yes.
Yes, and Alice is West Mercer. And then we have from West Mercer helping us manage teams, Julie Langley and Chris Coughlin-Ray and David Baxter, and then the middle school, Ellis Reyes. So we really appreciate all of those people and their fine leadership with the students. So students, if you will please come up, and as directed, we'd like you to give your name, your school, the type of challenge you were in, and then maybe a sentence, of the highlight of your particular challenge. Okay, so come on up.
Thank you, high school, for setting the trend. And when you're done speaking, what we're going to ask you to do is come on up here behind us because we want that group picture.
Okay. I'm Oliver Schaff. I'm Ichiro Nakata.
I'm Sophia Ristabin.
I'm Lila Schroff.
And we participated in the engineering challenge this year at state and are now going to globals. And a highlight, I'd say, for our team was that we created a slam poem about climate change, and it created a really moving, I think it really moved the audience, so we're happy about that. And I'd also just like to thank Mr. Headley for supporting all of us throughout our journey this year.
Okay, I'm the only one from my team here today, and I'm Sid Schroff. The rest of my team members are Elliot Gear, Jonathan Agar, Keegan Wang, Tyler Langley, Aditi Manby, and Daniel Marcus. And we participated in the engineering challenge, and we're going to globals. And I think the highlight of DI this year was, I think it was making the mystery in our story.
Hi, I'm Thorin Finch. I'm from Mercer Island High School. I am, again, the sole representative of my team here. Our other members are Jasper Gear, Ella Thunen, Aiden Klein, and Bridger Burke. And we participated in the improvisational challenge, and we placed 4th. So I think probably a highlight from this year, maybe not necessarily a highlight, but a moment that really exemplifies what DI is all about is when we found out that one of our team members wasn't going to be attending the state tournament. We really had to be creative on an unexpected level to overcome the challenge and still perform our skit as everything was supposed to without a key piece of our team. So, yeah, thank you.
Hello, my name's Bobby Selden. I am from IMS and I do the improv challenge. I'm the only representative of my team, and I'm on a team of 7, and my team members are Stella. Okay, I don't know last names. Okay, Stella. Then it would be Sophia Loop, Ona Loop, and I know those because I had to write their names. Andy A. Okay, Andy A. Ben Noon. Okay, Ben Noon, and then Ellie. Well, I'm honestly forgetting, but and wait, what only okay, well, whatever. Okay, so my highlight of doing the improv challenge this year would definitely be actually coming up with something, because coming up with a skit to do, because it was always very fun in practice, because we'd always just do whatever, and we didn't really have any structure to anything.
I'm Trisha Chaudhry.
I'm Danielle Lee.
I'm Steffi Kim.
I'm Blakely Burke.
I'm Sadie Kim.
I'm Audia Single.
I'm Brendan Sung.
And this year we did the Fine Arts Challenge. And a highlight, I think,
Just hanging out with each other and eating snacks.
no. Okay. I think, was like, yeah, going to globals. This is our first time going to globals, and we're really happy.
Oh, and we're absolutely scrumptious.
That's the team name. Reference to snacks. Okay, Eldon and team.
I'm Hadrian Finch.
I'm Eldon Marshall. I'm Alex Burkowski, and there are still 4 other teammates that are not here. Max Walenke, Luke, Louisa, Neo Pandya, Liren B. Pasquo. Yeah, and we were doing the technical challenge, and we didn't get to globals, but our highlight of the year was
Probably making the drone actually work.
Ralph. You don't have to say all the team members. You just say your name.
Yeah, my name's Ralph. I was in Team Ding, and the other teammates weren't here. There's Noah, Doe, Maddie, Thunen, Drew, Linda, Cecilia, and Ethan. Yeah, no, the highlight was making the story and the props.
Thank you.
I'm Anna Koskinen.
I'm Anahita Najafian.
I'm Simone Shinoy. So we have 4 other team members: Sahana Subramanian, Sophia Loisel, Adelaide Swenson, and Amelia Hahn. And we're in team we haven't decided yet, and
We did the technical challenge.
and we got first place. Yeah. And so I guess our highlight would be our drone breaking. Yay!
And then fixing it again.
That's right. And then fixing it. Yeah. Okay. Came in costume.
I'm Quentin Shires.
I'm Zoe Boyle.
I'm Sam Karami.
I'm Allie Selden, and we have 3 members who didn't come today, which are Lulu Ketakamo, Zoe Leung, and Anya Viswanathan. And we did the Fine Arts Challenge. We got 3rd place at state, and then, you just experienced some technical difficulties.
That's their team name, too. Okay, team managers. Thank you. I think that's it.
Great. So if all the team managers would come on up as well so we can get our photo up. And thank you to all the parents for your support as well. We really appreciate you being here with your child and supporting them through Destination Imagination.
Next on our agenda is public input. Do we have anyone here? No one here for public input. Okay, so we will move on to our student representative report.
So only a week has passed since our last report, so we have a really short report today. At a district level, we had our second to last Superintendent Student Advisory meeting yesterday afternoon. 5th graders, middle schoolers, and high schoolers all met to discuss the vision and mission portions of Vision 2020. Using the digital tool Thought Exchange, we participated in understanding the student perspective on the draft statements, and additionally, we reflected on the tool being used to gather input as well as the method to best reach students. Another topic discussed with this group was the use of technology at different schools, and we shared opinions about expectations, current restrictions, and possibilities for future changes surrounding phones and iPads. High school STEM students had a great couple weeks as they attended the Northwest Regional Science Olympiad, and students placed top 6 in 7 events. Placing 9th overall, the science club will be going to state competitions. The high school quarter is ending tomorrow, so teachers are wrapping up units and looking ahead to the last 25% of the school year. And last but not least, students of all grades are excited to be heading into spring break for their vacations and relaxation time. That's it.
Thank you very much. And we will move to our superintendent report.
So I have a few things tonight. First up, as stated on the agenda, pursuant to Board Policy 3141, enrollment non-resident students, and based on our current and projected enrollments, it has been determined that the district is not open to new non-resident student enrollment for the 2019-2020 school year. I've considered all of the additional discretionary enrollment of non-resident students beyond this anticipated student enrollment will create a financial or programmatic hardship in light of available resources for the district. Next, as part of my report, I would like to recognize the passing of Myra Lupton. Myra served for many years on the superintendent's advisories. Prior to it being the community advisory, she served for many years and was always representative of the League of Women Voters and was an absolute staunch supporter of Mercer Island schools. In my short time here, I felt very endeared to Myra. She was a great voice of not only history, but common sense and reason, and was a wonderful sounding board for me personally. So I really felt this loss. Myra and her late husband, Homer, who died in 2015, were married for 65 years. They moved to Mercer Island in 1961, and Myra retired from teaching English in January of '92 after 31 years with the Bellevue School District. She was certainly active in supporting our schools, but in numerous civic committees on Mercer Island, including, of course, the local chapter of the League of Women Voters. And she was honored by the city as Citizen of the Year in 2003, in part for her advocacy for a sailing program at Luther Burbank Park. She is survived by her daughter, Susan, and 3 granddaughters. So I know that our community will feel that loss. Next up is a statement that I have been given permission to read publicly to the board. This is a joint statement from the Mercer Island Youth and Family Services Foundation and the Mercer Island Schools Foundation. The Mercer Island Youth and Family Services Foundation and the Mercer Island Schools Foundation are grateful for our community's commitment to the social emotional wellness of our children. Our 2 foundations have agreed to partner in raising short-term funding targeted to reinstate the single elementary school mental health counselor slated for cuts in the 2019 city budget through the end of the 2019-2020 school year. We do so with the hope and expectation that the city will work productively with a group of Mercer Island citizens that are studying potential solutions for long-term sustainable funding in 2020 and beyond. We commit this emergency stopgap funding to provide services for which our residents have voiced loud support. We expect that once a long-term funding structure for school-based counselors is in place, each of the MIYFS Foundation and the Mercer Island Schools Foundation can refocus all efforts on supporting their core missions, respectively, of supporting the gamut of social services offered by the MIYFS department and the educational services provided by the school district. And the last piece is a little video. Some of us went to Olympia with our student reps, and while we were there, the AWSP asked for permission to do a feature of our district student representatives and how they are a great example of student voice. And so they just this morning sent to Principal Puckett this short video that was taken while we were a day on the Hill, and I wanted you to be the first to see it, but I think it made its way onto social media already. But here we go, our day on the Hill with our first year of student reps.
Today we came to talk to state legislators and state senators about student priorities and student perspectives on laws and issues.
One of the goals we've been working on at Mercer Island School District along with Mercer Island High School is over the past couple of years, 3 years, we have been wanting to incorporate more and more student voice.
Having a student voice enables lawmakers to make policies that are better informed and have better lasting effects. I think a lot of the time when you see legislators making laws and policies, they get most of their feedback from superintendents or principals and all these adults talking about things that affect students directly. And I think it's a really good opportunity for students to say, I want you to prioritize this bill over this one, or I want funding to go to this because it directly affects a lot of my peers.
Student voice is essential in everything we do. As a superintendent, one of the first things I wanted to do when I came to Mercer Island was bring in student voice by adding student representatives to our school board, so we can really listen to our students all the way down to our elementary schools. We have 5th graders, middle schoolers, and high schoolers who we want to hear from how things are working for them.
So it was pretty exciting to be with our students and to watch them in action talking to their legislators. So I was here to support them.
That was all on the spot. They just asked us questions, and they did a great job. So I'm really proud of our students.
Any comments?
Is there URL up there? Did I miss that?
It's on. It was posted on Facebook.
Oh,
for sure.
okay,
I saw it there earlier.
Congratulations! That was a really nice portrayal of the work we were doing here. So I love that.
Yep. Yeah, and stick that link onto your resume.
Is that link going to be shared with the district on the district with that potential?
Yes.
Yeah.
Andrews is nodding. So we absolutely can even. We talked about whether or not to put it on the agenda, but we only just got it today, so we could link it here or put a link to it on the website on the school board page, because they were there as representatives for the school board.
All right, so we will move on to Section 3, Full Governance Process Monitoring Language Review, and we are reviewing Board Policy 2020 Fundamental 7, Equity and Inclusion.
Vice President Lurie, could I ask one question, and it's completely up to you? We have one staff member who's here who's going to do the presentation on 4A. I didn't get a chance to talk to you all beforehand because you were in executive session. Is there any way to bump that up so that our staff member can head home afterward?
I imagine so. Just want to look and see if we've got thumbs up. So we will now table Section 3A and skip to 4A, which is Board Policy 1800 OE10, Instructional Program English Language Arts Novel.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that adjustment. I'm here tonight with Danny King, who is a teacher in our English department. Katie McCon is another teacher who was actually one of the lead teachers for this particular novel, but she's had a commitment come up for her family that she had to attend to. So Danny's going to present tonight. Last week I presented you with a book for you to have an opportunity to read, which is Everything I Never Told You. I'm going to let Danny really talk about it further. This was a text that that Ms. McCon and some others had started to take a look at the beginning of the year, and if approved, would be actually in our schools as early as this May for some of our courses. This is a novel that has sprung out of continued development by the English department as they review all of their literature and try to find novels that are not only more inclusive and representative of our students and the community that we're in, but also bring a modern writing to the courses. So this book was published in 2015. It did quite well on a number of the bestsellers lists. While we have other novels that address similar topics with biracial families, some of those are ones that aren't as current, and so this offers another book to complement a growing range of not only diverse authors, but diverse characters, characters who aren't necessarily male protagonists, but continues to bring a diverse perspective. So Danny, let you take it over from there.
Great, thank you. Thank you again so much for taking the time, especially our department appreciates it when we're noticed and when you take the time to consider new texts for our department. As Fred mentioned, we do have back in the library some other texts like Amy Tan's Joy Luck Club is an older text. We've started using the graphic novel American Born Chinese at the sophomore level. I believe Ms. McConn's intention was to pilot this for freshman curriculum in second semester. So once again, I'm the only other person in the department who's read the text. I haven't done any actual curriculum planning development with the text, so I put together some talking points. So I'll try to address your questions as best I can, as if I were a teacher bringing this into the classroom and teaching it. So to follow up what Fred mentioned, we are intending to diversify our text to kind of, not to totally ignore, but to bring in new voices, not just the male, cisgendered, white, middle class type of worldview, because that doesn't quite reflect every Mercer Island student. So as we've been exploring new titles for the book list, it kind of is finding a needle in a haystack to find the perfect text. Because it has to be age appropriate, it has to have a certain level of sophistication. So there's all kinds of things we have to consider. And one way I think that Celeste Ng's Everything I Never Told You works really well is that there's this analogy of a text working as both a window and a mirror for students. So a window, and that MI students could see a window into a whole new perspective and worldview. What's it like for a mixed race family? On the other hand, other students are going to approach this text and see it as a mirror. They're going to see themselves reflected in the narrative, and that's a powerful moment as well. So it'll work both ways. Also, not just regarding racial identity in the book, it's a Chinese American father, white mother, mixed biracial children. Takes place in the 1970s Midwest, like small town Ohio. So you can imagine in that context, they are the only biracial kids in that town, and so what that experience would be like. This is also definitely a mirror text, in my opinion, because it deals head-on with issues of mental health and parental pressures on children. The title, Everything I Never Told You, hints at the novel's main motif, which is really silence, what's unspoken, the things that parents may not know about their children, and vice versa, and each other's kind of isolated suffering. So that also mirrors a Mercer Island student experience. There's a lot of pressures to perform well academically, wanting to please parents, wanting to get straight A's, go to the right college, and that is completely evident in this text. Okay, so some of the main issues that I think would come up that if I were teaching this text, I would approach head on. I wouldn't want to sweep anything under the rug with this kind of text, and it's totally appropriate for a social emotional learning type of approach. The first one being the pretty complex racial dynamic and identity issues. So as mentioned, the father in the novel experiences quite a bit of racism. He's an academic at a university, resents the fact that he's not at a better university, so is experiencing racism that way. He's in the American Studies department, so he has all these white students that look at him like, why is a Chinese man teaching American Studies at this university? So experiencing 1970s racism in that context. There is a kind of resentment he feels and a suffering seeing his children also bearing that burden. And then also a secretly held resentment that he feels like his wife, who's white, may resent the fact that their children are not white. So there's really complex identity issues going on there. There's also issues of gender roles and the gender role dynamic. The mother in the story is a housewife, but she is resentfully so. She wishes she had pursued med school, and she was a very good student in school. It's a non-linear story, so it jumps around in the narrative from different perspectives. So she really resents the fact that she has had to stay home and raise her children instead of pursuing her academic and intellectual endeavors. So she doesn't fulfill her dreams in that way. So therefore, she puts all the pressure on the central focus and the main death in the story, which is the daughter Lydia, and she wants to live vicariously through that daughter, pushing her to be successful in school, pursue med school, even though the daughter is trying to please her mother but wants nothing to do with medical school. So the gender role dynamic is another one that's evident in the text. Thirdly, mental health dynamic dealing with parental pressures. I think if I were approaching this in the classroom, I would start off asking students, how do you define success? What does it mean to be happy? And really exploring that question, having students be honest, maybe using some technology in the classroom like a Padlet where they can give anonymous responses and see, have students be able to share freely. And noticing those kind of patterns of when students are saying, well, grades equal happiness and grades are how one is successful, and approaching it from that angle, like, are grades really, is that really a measure of how we're successful in life? And also that pressure for the central daughter who dies at the beginning of the story, that pressure to be perfect in every way. Fourthly, along with mental health, simply grief and death, dealing with tragedy in a family, especially when a child dies in a family, a huge tragedy. The novel, it focuses really on silence and how everyone is silently in their own kind of realm of suffering. The mom and dad start to drift apart from each other, which of course that often happens when a child dies. Usually those couples, it's really tough for them to reconcile and stay together. One blames the other one. And as they work with the police department to discover what actually happened, it's evident it wasn't a homicide. They suspect maybe this was a suicide, and they're like, no, of course, our daughter was very happy. As they slowly kind of uncover, Lydia is the daughter's name, what happened to her, they slowly uncover the truth that she was deeply, profoundly unhappy. And of course, mental health issues weren't something that were openly discussed in the household. The reader finds out at the very end of the novel that it was not a suicide, it was an accidental death. But this could still be a triggering issue in the classroom, since that is the angle. So there's a point of dramatic irony. The reader knows that Lydia did not take her own life, even though she was profoundly unhappy, but the characters within the story do not know that. So there could be this would need to be handled delicately. Another freshman text, Romeo and Juliet, has, of course, teen love and a suicide in it, and that's handled with care. But certainly a more contemporary novel. It's a little bit more of a visceral experience for students, and I would really, if I were approaching this, I think a teacher would really have to know who their students are and communicate with parents, know what kids could really experience, or maybe have experienced trauma in that area before. Definitely a second semester text. So by the time the classroom's comfortable with each other and with the teacher, it's a safe space, and the teacher really knows the students. So mental health, dealing with grief. Another issue I wanted to make sure I mentioned, and maybe this might have be a question from the board, there is an instance that's kind of intertwined with racial identity. The father actually, after the daughter's death, has an affair with the graduate student who's his TA, and the woman he has an affair with happens to be Asian American. So there is this tinge of just a more complex, layered issue where the father resents his wife and feels as if his wife resents him for wishing the children were white. So a very complex, layered kind of resentment here. I think the first questions that students would ask would be, why is he having an affair right after his daughter died? What's going on with that? So that would be something to bring up in the classroom. Yeah, why would someone do this in this situation if they care for their children and their wife? What kind of grieving process would lead to this kind of circumstance? And the novel handles it with seriousness and care. It's not a joyous kind of affair. It's definitely one of escapism from grief. So that would be an issue. And then touching on the fact that this is, he seeks out an Asian American woman to have the affair with, and this racial complexity to the novel. So those are kind of the main points. So lots of mental health issues, racial identity, some gender roles also. So lots going on in this text. Some other points, I think it totally fits the dynamic of social emotional learning. I would imagine small group discussion, some larger group discussion, and certain topics really facilitated by the teacher, especially the very delicate ones. Lots of opportunities for student reflection, exit tickets. That's one of the greatest ways that teacher can really know what kids are thinking. Talking about how do we define what success is, right? And this is a very common experience. It's definitely a mirror for all those Mercer Island kids who feel that parental pressure from their peers to perform well, and they wrap up their identity with that. From an academic standpoint, and in conjunction with the other novels at that grade level, so another newer text we had this year was Aristotle and Dante. That was a Mexican-American author about two young men who fall in love. Where I think this novel pairs well with that one, of course, it's another cultural perspective. This is a much more sophisticated novel from a writing standpoint, much more challenging narrative. It's non-linear. It moves around in the perspectives, whereas the other text is much more, it's an easier read, quicker read, much more heavy-handed with its symbolism. This one is much more nuanced. So especially if a teacher were designing lit circles, so that's where you split up the class and have different groups of students read different novels, it would set itself up for differentiation. So you'd have the kids that need more of a challenge that second semester take on a tougher read, more abstract ideas they'd be writing about, and then you can give a novel that also has a multicultural perspective, a window and mirror of Aristotle and Dante, and give that to a group of kids who maybe need a little bit more simplistic way of approaching the way they're going to write an essay. So with that, I think that I covered all my points, but what questions do you have for me?
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be the most watched board meeting by the freshman second semester English students.
Right?
I'll put my money on that today. Thank you very much. That's an amazing overview, super helpful. Sounds, I couldn't do justice to your commentary and ask you any more thoughtful questions. So thank you very much. Sounds like a great selection.
Yeah, I did manage to read the novel this week,
good.
and you gave an excellent summary and really touched on so many of the points and pre-addressed a lot of concerns. And I do have some concerns about it, and yet I also think you need a book that has a lot of potential controversy about it to really give some rich discussion and potential for writing great essays about it. So I don't really have any questions. I just think I'm really glad that we're doing even more diversification. I was so happy to see the Parable of the Sower and the Aristotle and Dante texts added a few months ago. Also great reads. So it's just nice that we're adding more variety, more perspectives, another female author. And I guess actually one question I did have is, did we have any Asian American teachers or students or other staff take a look at it and give their perspective? Does anybody know that?
That's a great question.
That did not come up in the instructional materials question or committee's questioning on that. Unlike textbooks where getting student perspective and having them look at is, we do that, much more. We're pretty cautious about that with novels. Obviously, we have the novel in our library, and so one-offs, but at the same time, we don't want to get out ahead of any adoption process. But I don't know the answer to that, Director Drinkwater.
I don't either, unfortunately.
Just as a minor suggestion, that maybe I think that could be, especially if the teacher is not Asian American, to bring that perspective. I know the students will have plenty of opportunity to do that, but I think that would be my next step in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
This is terrific. Thank you for all the work, and I just echo other directors' comments. Really appreciate the English department's work on finding diverse subjects and diverse authors. And I think also just a recognition of former director Adair Dingle, who was very passionate about that. And she would often mention the importance of that, and nice to see that work's going on.
So I made it halfway through, so you gave me the end. Thank you. I'm just kidding. I'm actually really, really enjoying it. And for me, it's a really fast read, and I'm not a huge reader. So it's interesting that you say that it's a more challenging read. It's good to kind of put that in perspective for me. I like I said, I'm really enjoying it. And you brought up, like Tracy said, you brought up some of the issues that were a little bit concerning to me in terms of students, but, it's life, and they're certainly watching a whole lot more complex in movies and TV. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great book, and I really like how bringing in the diversity of our students, and while this isn't a current day story, it's recent, or maybe it was just kind of the timing of my childhood that I really related to it. I'm not sure, but I think it's a good choice as well.
I'm really excited to see this happen, because growing up in this district, I found that I never really saw myself in the material until like this year. So to know that the kids who are coming through it now are going to see more of themselves, I think it really contributes to a learning environment that's so much more beneficial. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think the other one worth mentioning is it has won the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature and Adult Fiction. So I think we were concerned, has it been reviewed and culturally appropriate and things like that, and it did win the award. So presumably that signifies something.
True.
So I'm being coached that this is just a first reading, and I imagine that it will be put on the consent agenda for approval for our next meeting. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And I just want to thank the English department, Katie McCon for leading this, and Danny for you being here tonight, continuing to dig in. I know that a number of them, I don't know, did you go to Portland with the group? So we just sent a group of teachers, most of the department, down to Portland for a writers conference last week. They had a chance to do some, and they were even sending messages along the way about how inspired they were and some great things they're seeing. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of forward momentum from this department in the years to come, which I'm really excited about. And lastly, just the Instructional Materials Committee. We kind of had a tight turnaround on this novel, and the committee asked for an extra week to be able to read and really do some other research before they approved it. So we used an online Google form to actually do the voting on it, because they wanted extra time. They wanted to be sure that this was the right text. And so I think they're really doing their due diligence as well as a committee. So I wanted to just recognize that committee. So thank you.
Okay, so we will move back to 3A, Board Policy 2020, Fundamental 7, Equity and Inclusion Language Review. So I will defer to Donna.
Yep. So last week we had the monitoring of Fundamental 7, and this is the opportunity to review the language for Fundamental 7. And also, last week we presented the draft of the revised superintendent interpretation of this. Just a reminder that the monitoring was based on the previous interpretation. This is the revised interpretation. And the board can take action or have a discussion on this, and we can always bring it back at another time. I don't know if you want to first do your the language review and then address the interpretation after that.
Does anyone have any comments on the language review?
I think it's excellent. I especially love the part about diversity is considered an asset, and while that may have been in there before, I just think it's great to highlight that.
Then any discussion on the interpretation? There was, I can start since no one's jumping. I just had one thing. Well, first of all, I really enjoyed it. There were a lot of things I liked about it. One concern, and I was kind of going back and forth, it's the superintendent's interpretation. It was just in terms of the third sentence, the last sentence in paragraph 1, and how it concludes with students with greater needs have access to greater resources. And I imagine that your choice for using the word resources rather than supports is because we see teaching and coaching and other services like that as resources. I'm a little bit concerned that choosing resources, people jump to some students are going to get more money, and not to them. The way that I personally would interpret it, it isn't that way. But what I think what the meaning is they're actually getting those students that that have greater needs get greater support. So just throwing that out there to think about. That just crossed my mind when I read that.
I think you make a good point. Were you suggesting the word support to replace resources?
I mean, I certainly, yeah, I'm suggesting it. I don't want to see it open a can of worms when I think I'm clear on what the true meaning is. I just think that a lot of us jump from resources is financial resources, and the true meaning is that yeah, things cost money, and more staffing and supports cost money, but that's not the intention of the statement. And I would just hate to see that misconstrued. If people don't think it would be misconstrued, then I think it's great. I mean, I think the sentence is the intention is very appropriate.
Okay, thanks.
What was the superintendent's intent, actually?
It certainly wasn't regarding financial resources. It was really about the gamut of resources, not wanting to call one specific thing out. Sometimes it might be differentiated literature, as was addressed this evening by the English teachers. Sometimes it could mean a different technological support. Sometimes it could be people's support. It's just resources looking at how are we utilizing all of our resources for students who have with the greatest needs.
Okay.
I will say that of the 3 interpretations this year, this one was the trickiest. I started it early on knowing that it would, for me, be the greatest challenge, and had, of course, always had staff weigh in, because the intent is always how do we make sure that were impacting students. And for me, this one was the hardest, the most difficult to really bring it down to the student level of impacting students. So absolutely open to if there's a sense that when it's being read, it's not relaying exactly what we need it to relay, we can make adjustments and bring it back if the board determines that.
Yeah, I appreciate calling out supports versus resources. To me, I don't see the difference per se. I think people will read into it their own kind of biases. I mean, I think what we're talking about here is equity. It's not equality, it's equity, and equity means there'll be differential supports. So I think I'm fine with resources, but I'm fine with support either.
Presumably, this has also been reviewed by the Equity Advisory Committee as well. Do they have a say into this?
They have not looked at this time. The last time we met, we were focused on the vision, values, and mission, but we will certainly move it to them as an example and make sure that they if the board's already weighed in, it will be difficult to have them weigh in, but we will certainly make them aware of this document. All of our leadership team and our ILT have weighed in on it.
I think one of the challenges that comes up oftentimes is the issues around race versus all the other forms of diversity there are. And there's always concern that we lose our focus on race because of all the other ones that we can spend time on. And that was a concern when the diversity group was originally created. I'm wondering, that's why I'm kind of wondering what the response is now, because we have very broadened it. And the previous statement, we kind of focused a little bit more on race, although we acknowledged other forms of diversity exist, and that seems to have gone away now. And yeah, so really the question is, I appreciate this, but how do groups take that?
I do know that the work that the Equity Advisory is engaged in this year, we are using a couple of facilitators from the PSESD, and we have had that very hard discussion about race being really the focus of our equity work. Certainly we have extended the conversation and included other marginalized groups as well, particularly when there have been issues that have occurred within our community as to how that's impacting our local community rather than just the whole greater. Did still try to keep that race piece as a driving force and a component here, but in reviewing much of the recent work on equity in education, some of the work in the Nation at Hope and some of the work around Pedro Nagaro's work and his more recent work, certainly still calling out the others as well to make sure that race is primary, but we also need to acknowledge that we all come in with the different experiences, and so how do we, as a system, an educational system, serve the needs within all of those different categories. But if there's a sense that there needs to be a stronger statement that that is the primary focus, we can certainly play with that as well.
Yeah, actually, I'd encourage that a little bit more. I think the general discussion around race in America has been difficult for the reason that, it's a hard place to pit marginalized groups against each other. And so that's just a terrible place to be. And that's kind of what's happening when I do make this suggestion. And I kind of appreciate the hole I'm digging for myself a little bit when I make that request. But, you know, in general, when I do think about race, it has been the conversation that America quickly leaves and finds something else that is probably just as important to focus on, and maybe to our detriment a little bit. So if there's a way, and I especially think more eyes from the equity advisory team might be useful on something like this, as opposed to just the board members. And I know that puts the superintendent in a challenging position too, but yeah, thank you.
I don't think you're digging a hole. I think you bring up a really good point. I mean, there's pros and cons to all of it, I think. And I mean, on the one hand, it's the superintendent interpretation, but then on the other hand, it needs to meet the needs of our community. So, I mean, I think it's a great discussion to have. Would love to get some input, both from people that serve on the equity committee and then also people that choose not to. I don't know if this is something that Meghana and Caroline want to discuss with their peers also. I mean, one of the things that I really like about it is seeing each of these issues, diversity, inclusiveness, equity, as an asset, and then also the statement, especially about diversity itself, is inclusive. That diversity comes in so many different ways. Race is a tremendous challenge. So is there a way to do both, which I think are really important things to do. So I don't know if Meghana had any comments. I didn't look your way.
I don't really have as much experience as you guys to understand the impacts of specific words, so I don't really have much to say.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just want to give you a chance. Any other comments?
I appreciate Director D'Souza's comments. I think you had a lot of insights as the representative of the board serving on the diversity committee for, what, 2 or 3 years? 3 years. And there were a lot of difficult conversations while Fundamental 7 was being developed. And so towards that end, kind of maybe getting a little bit more input, maybe a little bit more thought, and have it come back to the board again, I think would be beneficial, at least to some more thoughts about it.
So unless anyone has any other comments for today, I'm hearing that we should bring it back for a second reading.
Certainly, we do not have, because of spring break and schedules, we do not have an equity advisory meeting until May 16th. So we could certainly front load it with them as an agenda. Please review, bring any suggestions or changes, but then we wouldn't be able to bring it until the end of May back to the board.
I don't think that's a problem.
I don't think that's an issue.
I do have a question, and I may be confused. I thought normally when we went over revised language for these fundamentals, it was also an opportunity to look at indicators as well and to suggest changes with indicators. But I defer to other board members or the superintendent to recall the past practice.
I thought the opportunity for addressing indicators was last time, but I could be wrong. When we did the Fundamental 7, but maybe not. Maybe it happens at the same time. Yeah. But I think since this year we're doing some revised interpretations for the superintendent, that we might want to approve the interpretation before addressing the indicators? Since the indicators are supposed to be based on the interpretation? Does that make sense?
I think because we were so focused, I think, Director Jorgensen, the usual cadence that you're describing, I think, is the way it's worked, is the next meeting you've had time to, there's been often times where we've had suggestions in the first reading, but it's really the second, or not, it's not even a second reading, because you actually voted in the previous meeting to find the superintendent in compliance, but then we bring it back for language review. I think because we were so focused on the interpretation that we just didn't put back up all of the language review materials there. To your point, Director Jinkwater, I think we could definitely go back following the interpretation, or when we bring the interpretation back and put it together. I'll follow your lead, Superintendent Kolosky, on that, but just historically, I think, Director Jorgensen, that is correct. We usually do it the next meeting.
Yeah, and I bring that up because there's some suggestions, and I kind of alluded to it when we were bringing it up, and I wouldn't want too much time to pass. So towards that end, if I could suggest that since we're delaying this, that when this comes back to the board, that we kind of continue to the same similar practice. We bring the interpretation as well as the indicators, so that we don't postpone that further out.
I did have one concern. This is the superintendent's interpretation, and then the board approves it. As much as I respect the input of the Equity and Advisory, or
Superintendent's Equity Advisory Committee.
Equity Advisory Committee. What I wouldn't want to see happen is for them to tear apart your interpretation and make it theirs, because I think that sort of defeats the whole purpose of this document. While their input could be valued, I just have a little bit of hesitancy to, or maybe it's just in the nuance of how you present it to them and what kind of feedback you're seeking, that would be important. But I wouldn't want to see a completely different document brought before us after May 16th.
And I think it's in the title of the group as well. It's the Superintendent Equity Advisory Committee.
Okay.
So certainly we will seek their advice as to how they feel this flows. But I think to Director Jorgensen's point about the monitoring, the measuring tools as well, because that's all considered when we're working on this, as well as how it's going to impact that process too. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at those measurements, we want to make sure that it aligns with what the interpretation's saying as well. Mm-hmm. So we do need to keep all of the moving parts aligned as best we can.
Because I think there's so much great about this document, in that I think you could start reading it, and whether you felt diversity meant race or whatever other aspect that you relate to most strongly, that you could see your perspective in it. There's a lot of generalities in there. And then it does call out with race being the first item. And race is often the most obvious one, which totally makes sense. And I appreciate the value that we put on saying that this has been historically the most challenging aspect of diversity in our culture to get right. So, but I still like that all these other ones are mentioned, because a lot of people have multiple of these differences that affect them in various ways. And so, such is the nature of diversity. So.
Sure. And I think the place where we really tried to emphasize, or I tried to emphasize the race aspect, is the last long sentence in the second paragraph: all students, and especially students not part of the majority race or ethnicity, need to be in learning environments that reinforce their sense of academics. So trying to give that acknowledgement there, but perhaps that needs to be stated with more emphasis in some way, so that it's called out a little bit more easily.
If I can add, and maybe it doesn't, but I guess the thing would be because the diversity committee had so much input on it, I would value their input. It's your interpretation, but and they shouldn't be steering it. I just want to make sure that there's opportunity for plenty of input, and we don't shortcut it.
And I think the work being done from the teams as they came and reviewed the equity work they're doing, Fundamental 7, last time, was amazing. So we're very happy with that. Obviously, the board voted in compliance, and it was very touching work, clearly addressed issues around race, religion, all the aspects of diversity as we talk about. So in many ways, the work that's being done reflects very strongly on what our values are, regardless of the words here. And the idea is to empower the superintendent to make sure that the words are accurately reflecting all the work and the constituency at hand.
Absolutely. We'll look to calendar this in our last meeting in May as a review, and we'll bring all the components of it so you can see them together, because they are all parts of the puzzle.
Okay, thank you. Excellent discussion. Moving on to 4B, Board Policy 3231, Student Records, second reading.
So these three policies that were presented actually a couple of meetings ago with kind of an interrupted cadence in our meetings with the schedule. So Erin is now here to talk with you about these three policies that, even though we need you to take action on each one individually, they are presented as a trio. That's how we presented them the last time, because they are very interrelated. Erin.
Thank you. So again, I apologize I was not here at the last meeting to present these, but I'm here to answer some questions that you may still have. And we've included this time for all three of these policies, I believe, at least that was my intent, associated procedures and other information. Really, these three policies are being brought together because of changes in recommendations in terms of what we should do vis-a-vis information we receive on certain juvenile offenders, be they sex offenders, kidnapping offenders, risk level 1 and 2 offenders, and what are the obligations for the principals. Really, the impetus behind this is the state auditor's office conducted a series of studies and really learned that principals were confused, in part because there was conflict in the legislation itself, or the statutes, as to what they were supposed to communicate to their staff and how they were supposed to communicate it and when. There was also some case law that came out beginning in 2016 that went through various appellate process. The case is NL v. Bethel 186 WN 2D 422 from 2016, in case anybody wants to know, that really highlights the conflict that occurs there and the potential risk. And so as part of their process, they were trying to see how to make this easier and better, and they came out with guidance for school districts on what principals should do and how they should communicate so they can comply with the law, which is really geared to protect students and protect staff and ensure the safety of everyone, while sort of the counter juxtaposition and balancing the need for privacy of those students. So it's really to provide guidance, because principals and administrators, teachers, they all want to do the best they can to keep students safe, and they also don't want to unnecessarily interfere with or reveal private information about their students. So this is really an attempt to balance that. And so I'm just here to answer questions. The change in the student records one, since we're talking about that right now, specifically if you go down, it addresses official juvenile court records and history of violence shall be sent to the enrolling school. So that's because they have their own obligations to ensure to communicate that to their staff. So that's one of the changes. There's also some, as we've been going through this to align our policies with WASDA's policies, we've also been trying to update our cross-references to ensure that we reference our own policies as well as applicable statutes. So those are the primary changes you see there. Are there any questions since we're on this policy?
Yeah, thank you. This was a great deal of work and a ton of different references, and those were all appreciated. I'm curious, when a principal needs to understand what they need to do they have to go navigate all the different references, or can they just look at the policy and the policy is kind of standalone?
So the idea is that a principal, if they do receive information, would look to our policies and procedures to see what they needed to do. In our district, really principals, we work well together. And a principal, were they to get information like this, they typically would call someone else, a critical friend, for lack of a better term, to make sure they're doing it correctly and they're reading the policy correctly. In our district, that's often myself or the assistant superintendent or even the superintendent. So we try to make the best decisions and handle things carefully, but the policies should stand and speak for themselves. The other advantage of having published policies and procedures is it makes it transparent and clear for the parents and students. So they know what we are going to do when we get information. So that's the other reason, is to help. I sort of focused on the principals because that's really the impetus for the state auditor's office's work, is that there was clearly this confusion and it resulted in some really pretty horrible things happening to some students because staff didn't have the information, so couldn't put the appropriate protection plans in place. And the losers in that are the kids. And really it's both kids, the offender, and the victim, but more so obviously the victim. And we want to keep kids safe. And we want to help students who need supports to ensure that happens. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I get that. Okay, thank you. It's still complicated.
It is, and these updates, we always work through them in our management team, leadership team meetings, as well as to boards now adopted this policy or this law change, and here's where you find it, here's when this red flag goes up, reach out to us, here's what we have, here's how we'll work through it together to make sure that we're being compliant, but also protecting all students. So we do update these with the leadership team as well. When the new laws come in, we spend a lot of time reviewing them with them and just directing them to where they are too. So when it doesn't happen every day, but when it does, here's where you go to find the resources, and we're here to help you too.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this extra information, and it was really helpful to me as I've got experience on both sides of this. And I think what's really, really helpful is, to know the guide and to know what it is that the different issues that are being balanced and considered. And to me, personally, that's the most important. And I also would love to emphasize, and I guess mostly in question form, while this is important that the school district does this, I know this is a very small number of times that our administrators have to deal with these. So while it is so important to protect everyone at the school, that we don't want to put kids in situations where in terms of offenders or potential offenders, protect them. They're learning and they're growing, and make sure that they're set up for success. But also know that these are very unusual incidents, unusual in terms of numbers, and so which also can lead to confusion in terms of how to deal with it. They're not day-to-day issues that our principals need to deal with.
Right, and I think that, again, I want to emphasize that I don't want anything that I said, if I misspoke, to be construed as that I think we have an equal obligation to all students, those who have been offenders and those who otherwise are their peers. And it's really to support all students, and this is this is a tool by which to support them. And it is not as common, which does create confusion, but there's also over 300 crimes that courts are required to report. And the levels of those crimes depend on what we're supposed to tell whom, when, where, and why. So it really does, there is just confusion on all ends, and this is an attempt to really alleviate that while still protecting the interests of all involved. So I appreciate your emphasis, giving me the opportunity to make that clear.
Thank you. Are we ready to approve? Take a vote?
Yes, I think so.
I move we approve the proposed revisions to Board Policy 3231, including the procedure.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Board Policy 3231 is approved.
Thank you. I'm going to stay here as we advance. Do I need to do that, Fred?
I've got it.
Perfect. And as I just obviously referenced other staff members, I just want to emphasize that when we do get new policies and procedures, it's reviewed and set by management team, but we do draw on our subject matter experts, which is often our principals, our teachers, the people in the field who work so closely. So I just want to recognize the effort of all the people who are involved in, because I think sometimes I'm the person standing here, but I'm just the speaker. I'm just the spokesperson. This really represents the effort of so many people. So that they're not here, maybe they're listening, but I just want the board to know how much goes into updating this stuff. The next policy is Policy 3143, and as I sort of highlighted, it is, again, really so that principals know what they need to communicate to who when, and again, it's in response to updates that have come out, in part because of this state auditor office review, changes in the law, and trying to balance that tension between student privacy and making sure for the safety and protection of all students, including offenders or former offenders. So the other thing, there was also removal, which in the WASDA policy, and I don't believe that we referenced it, but we do reference now the 3143F, Guide for Principals Notification of Juvenile Offenders. There used to be, in 2006, they issued a sort of checklist that was very outdated. So they did some work to give some better guides. So that is 3143F, and it just is more accessible and a clearer process for people to follow. And I said everybody wants to be doing the right thing, and this is just to help them. Also attached in your materials, I think, is RCW 1304-155. And the key thing is that one of the tensions that came out in recent case law is that RCW 9A.44.138, which you don't really need to know all of that, but essentially it dictated that principals are required to provide information to staff regarding student sex offenders or kidnapping offenders based on their risk level 1, 2, 3, 4, but it was risk level 2 and higher if my memory serves. Where the RCW 1304-155, it says principals must provide this information from courts regarding students of conviction, adjudication, or diversion agreements. And it's limited by the Students' Records Act, which is RCW 28A 255-330, and FERPA, but there's no limit in terms of risk level. And in one of the cases, the principal was like, well, I've got a sex offender situation, which they don't meet the risk level threshold, so what do I do? So this is really to provide guidance and sort of solve that conundrum based on the case law, which, as we all know, is an interpretation then becomes law. So that's really one of the reasons for the change. And they erred on the side of being more protective.
So just a reminder to the board that this is a proposed new policy. We don't currently have policy 3143. The previous policy was some revisions. We did have that one, and we gave you some revisions for that. So this one is a proposed new policy that is not currently adopted by Mercer Island School District.
And the guidelines are new too, correct? And those are up for approval as well? For 3143F?
Yes.
And
I
I'm just
believe.
guessing based on the note at the bottom that says adopted, and there's only one date, and it's TBD.
Yeah, that would be the new date.
That would be the new date.
Right.
Right. And to the extent it's relevant, this was also, we had a recent Title IX review. It was last spring, I believe, and we did incredibly well. So it's a credit to all the people in this district. But this is something that they noticed we did not have. And they felt that it was significant that we did not have it.
So I'm just not sure if I remember seeing that one before, if it's, this is a second reading for both of those documents, 3143 and 3143F?
I think it's a second reading for 3143. I don't
It
think
might
it's a
be a
second
first
reading for 3143F, but I think
That's-
3143F may be procedural and therefore not something that necessarily requires board action. But the policy would. So
Good point.
I tried to bring
That makes
forth
sense.
more material to give greater context.
We wanted you to have all the information, the same with the
That's
last
why
one, we
it's
gave you
a
the
reference,
procedure.
not.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry
Now
if
I
I
understand
made
it.
it confusing.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
I move we approve the new policy 3143.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Board Policy 3143 has been approved. And I just want to thank you for the extra information on this one as well. As I know you know, this is how lawyers spend all their time, and it's complicated. And so to expect our school personnel to really understand what to do, and also parent community in terms of protecting their student is, whatever situation they might be, is really complicated. So thank you for your focus on this.
So just before we start on the next one, 4314 is also new, proposed. You currently do not have this policy, and it is in its second reading. We did bring it previously, and we've also provided the procedural piece as well, just to give you some further clarity, especially because it is new.
So again, this was part of a grouping of policies, and again, this is just notifications who will notify when, and it's again to provide transparency and clarity regarding what we will do. And this cross-references, I believe, and I'm trying to, I think it cross-references. Excuse me for checking. So this does have a cross-reference to FERPA and the public records and the sharing of student records. So that's one of the reasons why this was tied together in the December issue of the Policy and News Update, which is hence our attention to this. Do you have any specific questions about this policy?
Are there any requirements on how up to date the records are, out of curiosity?
So, up to date regarding what records? I'm sorry.
Student records, sorry.
So we're required to comply with student retention requirements as outlined in, I forget that manual, the core, it's called core. But either way, so we have to follow the state retention requirements, which has different retention requirements based on the document and the record. So some records are 6 years, some records are 100 years. So it depends on what record you're talking about.
So, sorry, I just meant, are they current? There aren't any outstanding records that are missing or anything like that? We're sure that this is a complete set and there's nothing missing from it, or do we just have the records we have? Like if there was a notification pending from a judicial system that hasn't been put into the records yet, could that be missed?
So we, if your question is whether or not we have up-to-date records of threats of juvenile offenders and what have you, and whether or not we've maintained them appropriately. I have no reason to think that we have not. I believe we have maintained them correctly and in compliance with the applicable retention requirements. So I think that our records are intact and fine, and I think that we've historically done a good job of communicating, but with staff appropriately. So I'm not really concerned about that. I've been the public records officer for just about 3 years now, and I haven't found an issue yet. I hope not to, but there's lots of records. But people do a good job and are pretty careful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Perfect.
Any other questions? Any motions?
I move we approve Board Policy 4314 as written.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Board Policy 4314 is approved.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And moving along we are at consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. The consent agenda is approved. And moving down to Superintendent's Report.
Just one more quick announcement. We have determined the date, so this is a reminder, save the date for the board, and I'll remind you again. For our second annual Spring All-Staff Ice Cream Social, co-sponsored with MIEA, is May 29th. So be ready to scoop ice cream. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And going to board announcements, inquiries, and reports, we will start with our legislative representative report.
Just a real high level, and this is coming from Jessica Vavris, our lobbyist for the WASDA. So, and she provides a weekly summary. So apparently we've got 3 weeks left with the legislative session. Top 3 highlights are, as I interpret them, is there's House Bill 2140, which proposes a change in the enrichment levy limit. Currently it's at the lesser of $2,500 per pupil or $1.50 per $1,000 assessed property value. We're at that $2,500 per pupil. And the proposed change is to either 20% of the combined federal or state funding base received the year prior, or the lesser of $3,000 per pupil or $1.50. So the take-home message was, if this House bill was to pass, our potential levy capacity could increase by 20%, from $2,500 per pupil to $3,000. But there's a lot of ifs, and there's 3 weeks left. So, item 2, special education funding. Both the Senate and the House have bills that propose to increase the cost multiplier by about 3%, which would increase some funding for special education. And I think the third thing was both the House and the Senate proposed operating budgets have one has $300 million, another has $400 million dedicated for SEB, but from what we've heard, SEB might be much higher than that, so that's kind of where it's at right now. So that's it, unless anybody has any questions.
One kind of related item, I'd say interesting, is the at the national level, the nutrition standards for schools being looked at. They're looking at rolling them back to the pre-Obama era. I know our food contract is up for renewal. Something to think about: which ones do we support and how do we support it? I know there was recently on NPR a statement that said diet is now responsible for more, bad diet is now responsible for more deaths than tobacco. So I think it's kind of interesting as we think about our food contract, which requirements we're following.
Thank you. Excellent observation, and a good thing to pay attention to. So the next item is the YFS Stakeholder Meeting Report discussion. Based on our Superintendent's report, I propose we move on, and I'm getting nods unless, no.
I've got like 2 sentences. Just to add on, this was an email from kind of the stakeholder leader, Jody Chris, who I think provided a statement at city public input. I think she believed that the stakeholder group was encouraged by city council statements of interest in finding some short-term money to add to the pool. And then the other statement I think worth highlighting is the city still needs to complete a YFS study session in late April where they will finalize the YFS fund budget. And then the city will consider at that time whether they can devote any additional funds to the short-term counselor gap. So,
Can I just get a clarification? That first item you were saying is that the city might be able to add to that?
I think that's the hopes.
Depending on the
Yeah.
rest of it. Okay, thank you.
And that hopes.
So I just want to, since all of you have been involved at some point, all of you, and I have not, I just want to express my appreciation for all of the hard work that Jody Chris and her group have taken. We know what an important issue this is to make sure that our families on Mercer Island are served efficiently and effectively and sustainably. So thank you all for your hard work going to some extra meetings and pushing things hard. I know it's not over. We're not at a sustainable solution yet, but we certainly are moving in the right direction. So thank you all for that. And just moving along to board reports.
No reports.
I just had to, the Island Park PAC meeting this week, where we had a visit from Donna and reviewed the board's proposed or draft of values, vision, mission, and the PAC participants participated in the thought exchange, and I got to just observe, and it was really cool and interesting feedback so far that I could see. So I look forward to learning more about the whole package of feedback that we get.
Just one random item. I was reading the Mercer Island Reporter and saw that our reporter, for the reporter, Katie Metzger, is bidding farewell to the Mercer Island Reporter. So appreciate her coverage of both the city and the schools. So very much appreciate that. And I recall a day when there was a dedicated reporter for schools and a dedicated reporter for the city. And I think Mercer Island Reporter is not unique in that a lot of local news reporting agencies are finding challenging times, and this paper is getting much thinner. And it's unfortunate because I think a local newspaper is very important to a community. So there you go.
Just briefly, I was at the middle school PAC meeting this week where we also did the mission, vision, values statements and the thought exchange. It was interesting, and it was the first time I've seen it, so it was, thank you for that. I think it's a great presentation, and I look forward to hearing from all of the groups out there. Just want to wish everyone a relaxing and fun spring break. Hopefully people have exciting things to do, even if it's working on some spring cleaning. which is what I'm going to do. Just as we head into this last quarter, like our student representatives report said, as the middle school started their third trimester, actually middle school and elementary school started their third trimesters a couple weeks ago and head into the fourth quarter, it's things are winding down. And so it's been a great year so far, and look forward to the final sections of them. And for the seniors to stay the course and do your work, and still haven't all heard from colleges. So I don't know. I've never heard of anyone getting their acceptance pulled for their grades. Maybe for other reasons, but we still appreciate we still appreciate the hard work, and you guys have a lot of fun activities coming up. All right.
I move we adjourn. Unless.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And meeting is adjourned at 7:41.